The ceremonial trumpet, if one could call a 12-foot-long, mucus-powered, bioluminescent spiral horn a trumpet, blasted with the wet authority of 1,000 flatulent walruses. The crowd roared. And by crowd, it meant thousands of aliens packed into the obsidian amphitheater of Zethurian Prime, a structure so vast it had its own weather system and occasional cloud-based sentience issues. High above them all, seated on the throne of living stone, was Queen Zelari the Unyielding, her 7 eyes narrowed in regal assessment. Clad in armor forged from compressed star dust and bound with the threads of collapsed dimensions, she sat in silence, jaw set, fingers drumming lightly on the hilt of her ceremonial blade, Vraxian's Mercy Asterisk, a name as ironic as it was poetic. Today was no ordinary day. Today was the choosing. According to Tharnai tradition, every queen, no matter how dominant, no matter how many galaxies she'd bent to her will, had to select a consort. Not through sentiment, and certainly not through dating profiles or polite brunches, but through the asterisk trials of worth asterisk. A gauntlet of agony, cunning, and raw cosmic terror designed to weed out the weak and terrify the brave. Zelari found the whole thing dreadfully outdated, but law was law, and as her late mother had said, if you must marry, at least do it with spectacle and explosions. The arena floor rumbled. Portals blinked open, each one disgorging a warrior more imposing than the last. A reptilian general with iron blades for arms roared as he stepped forward. A quadrupedal cyborg flared its thorax, releasing pheromones that made 3 spectators faint and 1 propose marriage to a vending drone. And then there was a slime-based creature that simply burbled ominously and oozed forward with the confidence of sentient gelatin. The queen barely blinked. A hush fell. The announcer, a metallic orb with a charming speech impediment, floated to the center and bellowed, "Let the worthy make themselves known. Let those of courage step forward into the light." And that's when it happened. A figure emerged, not from a portal but from a side maintenance door, clutching a half-unwrapped protein bar and blinking against the stadium lights like a man who just realized he'd walked into the wrong bathroom. Greg, average height, slightly rumpled hoodie, a t-shirt bearing the faded logo of a defunct Earth pizza chain, "Crust me, I'm delicious." Sneakers that squeaked on the obsidian tiles. The crowd fell silent, not in awe but in confusion. Even the gelatin warrior paused mid-burble. Greg squinted. Sorry, is this the, food court? I was told there'd be a buffet." Zelari leaned forward ever so slightly. "Who is that?" She asked the prime advisor, a floating cube of compressed bureaucracy. The cube spun uncertainly. "Unknown, Your Majesty, appears human, possibly defective." Greg took another bite of his protein bar and mumbled through the chewing. "Wait, is this the trials?" "Because I'm supposed to be in." He stopped, swallowed, then raised his hand as if volunteering for something at a PTA meeting. "Actually, you know what? Yeah, sure, let's do it, why not? Always wanted to be royalty. Also, I kinda owe my landlord 3 months, rent so." Gasps, hisses, a loud wheeze from the reptilian general who may or may not have been choking on rage. The orb announcer blinked several times. "Human contestant registered. Name Greg, species undetermined, courage level, cognitive rating pending analysis, fashion sense concerning." Zelari stared. This had to be a joke, a glitch in protocol. She was about to speak, to strike down the absurdity of it all with one motion, when Greg tripped over his shoelace and faceplanted into the sacred arena tiles. The arena erupted, not with horror but with laughter asterisk. Actual, genuine laughter. Several of the hardened warriors shook their heads. One slime warrior jiggled in a way that might have been the universal gesture for this guy's toast. Greg rolled over with a groan. "I meant to do that." Classic human intimidation tactic. Zelari, despite herself, felt a twitch in the corner of her third left eye. Amusement. That was new. She stood. "All contestants," her voice rang out, amplified by the sentient acoustics embedded in the arena walls, "shall be subject to the trials. None are exempt, even Greg." Greg sat up. "Cool. Are there snacks after or?" The crowd booed. One of the cyborgs flexed threateningly. The high priest slithered over to Zelari's side, whispering with reverence. "Majesty, you cannot be serious. That asterisk thing is not a warrior." He stepped forward, she replied coolly. "Tradition allows anyone who does. But he is squishy asterisk. He has no claws. He smells like processed cheese." "Yes," she said, and yet he stood when others hesitated. The high priest hissed. The queen smiled, barely, and so it began. Greg was escorted to the contestants' barracks by a beetle-shaped guard who emitted elevator music from his carapace. As they passed through the grand corridor, murals of past trial champions loomed, massive beings of fire and shadow, bristling with weaponry, immortalized in mid-slaughter. Greg whistled low. Yikes, lot of stabbing. Indeed, the beetle guard buzzed. Would you like your ceremonial armor customized? Got anything with elastic, or like a hoodie version? No, they reached the chamber. Dozens of warriors turned as Greg entered, some snorted plasma. Others simply ignored him. Greg found a cot near a malfunctioning coolant vent and dropped his backpack. He turned to the warrior beside him, a hulking insectoid brute sharpening 4 separate blades with his mandibles. Hi, Greg said. Name S. Greg, Earth U. The warrior responded with a guttural hiss that scorched the floor tiles. Cool, cool, guess we're all a little tense, first day nerves and all. The warrior blinked. You are not afraid. Oh, I'm terrified, Greg grinned. But I've been to an Earth DMV. This is practically a spa day. From somewhere far away, a gong echoed, the sound that signaled the first trial was about to commence. Greg stood, stretched his arms, and turned to his cot. Pip, you ready? The cot beeped, then unfolded, then reassembled itself into a floating spherical drone with one enormous eye and a voice that sounded like a snarky butler with abandonment issues. You dragged me into this, Greg. I thought you said the buffet was through the space vortex. I said probably through the vortex, not definitely asterisk. Greg grinned, cracking his knuckles. Well, here we are, Pip. Guess it's trial time. Splendid, I do so enjoy public executions. Have some faith, Greg said, stepping toward the blast doors that would open onto his first challenge. Worst case scenario, we go out in style. You're wearing pizza merchandise. Exactly, style. And as the great doors opened with a hiss and a chorus of dramatic musical stings generated by genetically engineered orchestra beetles, Greg stepped into destiny. Possibly. Maybe, or at least into a very large room that smelled faintly of ozone and impending doom. A hiss of hydraulics, a shimmer of shifting walls, a smell somewhere between ionized air and old gym socks. Greg blinked rapidly, half expecting the glowing doorway behind him to vanish, stranding him in what could only be described as a techno-minotaur's fever dream. Pip, he muttered. Tell me that's just really aggressive mood lighting. Nope, chirped Pip, floating beside him with a blink of his single eye. That's the labyrinth, alive, hungry, and most likely offended by your socks. They're novelty socks. They have anthropomorphic tacos doing yoga. Exactly. Good for morale. Pip emitted a sound suspiciously similar to a sigh, despite having no mouth or lungs. Remind me again why I followed you into this mess. Because you enjoy danger, chaos, and my warm personality. I was factory reset to avoid emotions, and I miss it. Before Greg could reply with something witty and probably counterproductive, the floor beneath them buckled ever so slightly. The black tiles rippled, revealing filaments of plasma threading through the ground like electric veins. Walls, which Greg had assumed were stationary, began to slide in eerie silence, revealing gaping corridors that twisted and looped in geometries that would give an architect a nervous breakdown. A booming voice echoed from nowhere, or everywhere, very helpful. Trial 1, the roaring labyrinth, escape in 1 hour or be disassembled, bonus points for style. Oh good, Greg muttered. They've got a flair for showbiz. A soft chime dinged over their heads, and a countdown appeared midair in glowing alien numerals that looked suspiciously like upside-down ducks. 60 minutes, Pip translated, assuming this reality measures time linearly. Greg took a hesitant step forward. What do you think the odds are this labyrinth is, metaphorical? Pip beeped. That depends. Do metaphorical hallways usually try to eat you? A portion of the wall retracted with a hungry, wet noise, revealing a hallway lined with organic cables that pulsed like a heartbeat. Yup, Greg said. Totally metaphorical. Let's go. They stepped into the corridor, which adjusted to their presence by flickering its lights menacingly and releasing the faint scent of burnt cinnamon. Every few meters, something hissed in the shadows, and once, a tiny mechanical spider dropped from the ceiling, scanned Greg's sneakers, and ran off screaming. Not metaphorically, it emitted a high-pitched scream and everything. Greg tightened the straps on his backpack. You think it's offended by Earth footwear? Everything is offended by your footwear, Pip replied, including me. The labyrinth curved sharply, leading them to a chamber with a floating platform in the center and 3 hovering orbs crackling with energy above it. Beneath the platform was an abyss with no visible bottom, just a soft humming noise that suggested either vast power or a very enthusiastic swarm of bees. Puzzle room, Pip observed. Classic. Greg squinted at the orbs. Do we touch them? No, Pip said. Greg touched one. The orb flashed, and suddenly Greg's hair stood on end, puffed out like a static-charged porcupine. The orb surprisingly giggled. You just got tickled by a plasma node, Pip said, unimpressed. This is going to be a long hour. Maybe it's like Simon says, Greg said, reaching toward the second orb. Or Tharnai says. Royalty-themed version. Greg. The second orb lit up in response to the first, then the third. Then they all began blinking in sequence, faster and faster. I think we're playing Alien Bop It, Greg said, eyes tracking the lights. You're going to die playing Simon Says with alien death orbs, Pip muttered. Greg mimicked the blinking pattern, slapping each orb as it lit. As he completed the final round, the platform beneath them jolted, then slowly began to rise across the chasm with a deep thrumming sound. Ha, Greg pumped his fist. Human reflexes, all that video game training paid off. You once lost a game of Pong to a parrot, Pip said. That parrot was really asterisk good. The platform carried them across the void to another hallway, this one narrower and filled with rotating blades. Giant ones, with neon trim, because apparently even death traps had to be fashionable. Obstacle course, Pip groaned. Why is it always obstacle courses? Greg surveyed the spinning doom. Okay, let's think, is there an off switch, or maybe like an accessibility ramp? No, Pip said, but there's a timing pattern. Greg narrowed his eyes. The blades spun at different intervals, some fast, some slow, some pausing every few seconds like they were catching their breath. All right, Greg muttered. We run between the third and fourth blades, slide under the short one, and jump through the slow double spin. Got it. I have no legs. You'll be fine, you're shaped like an air fryer. Greg took a deep breath and bolted. He ducked, twisted, and yelped as one blade nicked his hoodie. Pip zipped beside him, narrowly avoiding a blade that would have diced him into polite geometric pieces. They landed on the other side with matching expressions of shock and disbelief. I survived, Greg panted. I have witnessed miracles, Pip said. This doesn't qualify. The hallway ended at a circular chamber with a glowing pedestal in the center. Suspended above it was a glowing crystal. The final marker, the exit, probably. Touch it, Greg asked. No, Pip said. Greg touched it. The room filled with a soft humming, the walls retracted, and the ground beneath them shifted, forming a glowing walkway leading back to the arena. Applause, actual, stunned, reluctant applause echoed from far away. Greg stepped forward, triumphant. Well, that wasn't so bad, bit of cardio, bit of spark, little light screaming. The announcer's voice returned. Greg of Earth has completed the roaring labyrinth. SCORES, style moderate, survival acceptable, likelihood of further survival questionable. Greg raised both fists. I'll take it. Pip spun beside him. You nearly died like 5 times. Yeah, but I didn't. That's the Greg guarantee. In the royal box, Queen Zelari leaned back in her throne, one brow raised. The court murmured. The high priest hissed something unflattering, but the queen said nothing. She watched the human walk back into the light, hair frizzed, hoodie tattered, grinning like a lunatic. And for the second time that day, she almost smiled. The arena was louder this time. Not with celebration, nor approval. No, this was the low-frequency buzz of a crowd that didn't know what it felt and wasn't sure it liked it. Whispers clicked and clicked through insectoid mandibles, dripped from molten mouths, and beamed directly into psychic relay nodes. One word was shared across the galaxy-wide net of gossip and disbelief. Greg. Greg stood in the center of the platform again, fidgeting with a piece of synthetic tape that was holding his left sneaker together. The goo-stained laces had lost their will to live 2 trials ago. Beside him, Pip hovered in idle mode, slowly rotating like a confused Roomba. Does this look infected? Greg asked, holding up his elbow, which now bore a glowing green bruise in the shape of a small, unhappy face. I'm not a medic, Pip said. I'm a utility drone with identity issues. Could have fooled me, you nag like a nurse. Only because you injure yourself like an unpaid stunt double. The voice of the announcer orb rang through the stadium, now slightly more sarcastic than last time. Trial 2 commencing. Designation, 0G Combat Challenge. Opponent, General K. Torak of the Shattered Helix. The crowd screamed in anticipation. Somewhere, a trumpet made entirely out of beetles exploded from enthusiasm. A section of the floor opened, and a platform began to rise. On it stood a being that could be described only as too many limbs, not enough kindness. General K-Torak was a 6-armed, 9-foot-tall apex predator wearing spiked armor and a breathing apparatus that made him sound like a vacuum cleaner with asthma. He flexed each limb individually as if warming up for synchronized dismemberment. Greg gave a weak little wave. "Hey, General, big fan of the, helix. Sorry about the shattering, though, must have been rough." K-Torak growled. One of the spikes on his shoulder emitted a puff of steam. "You shall not joke long, meatling. The stars will sing of your pulverization." "Cool, cool, cool," Greg nodded. "Just checking. Do the stars also sing about awkward misunderstandings? Like, say, if I accidentally signed up for a trial thinking it was a spa package." Pip beeped, translating K-Torak's next words into something printable. "He says he will wear your skeleton as a bracelet." Greg raised an eyebrow, bit aggressive for a first date. The arena tilted, revealing a massive transparent dome. The combatants were slowly levitated into it by a series of anti-gravity lifts. Stars twinkled beyond the dome. Greg's feet left the ground, and he immediately began spinning like a slow-motion windmill in a tornado. "Whoa, whoa, okay. Nobody said we'd be fighting in a cosmic salad spinner," Greg yelped. "Your opponent has magnetized boots," Pip noted. "You have limited experience with trampolines." Greg tried to steady himself by grabbing a handle, which turned out to be part of a wall-mounted cannon. The cannon activated with a cheerful chirp and launched a non-lethal, but still extremely rude, stun pulse in a random direction. It clipped a spectator, who immediately began reviewing the arena's safety policies in a shrill tone. K-Torak leapt forward with terrifying grace, his magnetized boots letting him skate along the metallic walls. Each of his 6 arms activated a different weapon. 2 plasma blades, 2 electrified chains, 1 fist surrounded by orbiting gravity disks, and 1 hand holding what appeared to be a sandwich. "Is he eating during combat?" Greg asked. "It's a protein recharge ritual," Pip said. "Also, he's very hungry." K-Torak came at him in a spinning blur. Greg flailed. He tumbled like an uncoordinated balloon animal, barely missing the first strike by virtue of being upside down and unaware of his own position in space. "Okay, that was just luck," Pip muttered. "Correction," Greg grunted, flipping again. "That was strategy through incompetence asterisk, very advanced Earth technique." Another swing from K-Torak sliced through the air, missing Greg by centimeters. Greg grabbed a floating maintenance panel and flung it like a frisbee. It bounced harmlessly off K-Torak's helmet and insulted his lineage via a pre-recorded insult chip. The general roared and launched his chain whip, which Greg caught by accident while trying to push off a wall. The chain wrapped around his arm, yanking him forward, and for one heart-pounding moment, he and the general were hurtling directly toward each other. "This is it," Pip said. "This is the part where you lose all your teeth." Greg activated his backup plan. He sneezed. The pressure from the sneeze, caused by a dust mote from Pip's slightly moldy internal vent, tilted Greg's head just enough to miss K-Torak's elbow by a hair. He tumbled past the general, looped the chain behind him like a lasso, and managed, purely by accident, to entangle 3 of K-Torak's limbs in the momentum. The general, unprepared for the sudden entanglement, spun into a wall. The gravity discs on his gauntlet activated at the wrong angle, pinning him to the dome with the force of a minor tectonic plate. Greg floated to a stop, clutching the chain. "That was not what I intended." "He's immobilized," Pip said in disbelief. "You want—" Greg sat cross-legged on what the Tharnite called a rest platform, which was functionally a floating rock that emitted calming whale noises and occasional puffs of lavender gas. He tried to relax, but his legs had gone numb somewhere around minute 6, and the last puff of gas had triggered a sneeze so violent it nearly ejected Pip into orbit. "I think I'm getting used to the whole almost dying in space gladiator challenges thing," Greg said, massaging his foot back to life. "That's a bold claim from someone whose nervous system resets every time someone yells," Pip replied, hovering low to avoid another potential sneeze. "Hey, I survived the labyrinth. I survived the general. I even survived the cafeteria yesterday, and that was mostly asterisk food." Pip rotated slowly. "You licked an alien fruit that was vibrating." "It looked lonely." Before Pip could argue the ethics of fruit empathy, a trumpet blared overhead. This time it sounded suspiciously like a cat being stepped on inside a saxophone. The sky above the arena shimmered, and then a new voice, smooth, regal, and just slightly bored, cut through the air. Trial 3, The Truth Within. Greg blinked up at the glowing text that appeared midair. That's ominous. Pip chirped, sounds psychological. I was hoping for dodgeball. Let us be real, even then you'd be the ball. A staircase unfolded beneath them, made of translucent panels that rearranged themselves mid-step, like a show-off escalator. Greg followed it downward, the temperature subtly dropping as they descended. At the bottom stood a tall archway formed from pure energy, pulsing a cool violet. In front of it hovered a being dressed in shimmering robes made from data streams and nostalgia. Its face was hidden beneath a constantly shifting pattern of famous tragic expressions from 10,000 species. One moment it was a crying tiger worm, the next, a weeping philosopher cactus. I am the Oracle of Echoes, the being said in a voice that came from behind Greg's own thoughts. You may call me Bob. Greg squinted. Your name is Bob. Everything sounds more profound when said by a Bob, the Oracle replied. Pip beeped in agreement. Valid point. The Oracle gestured at the archway. Pass through and face your inner self. Survive the truth and you move on, fail, and you remain trapped inside your regrets for eternity. Greg paused. Quick question. On a scale from 1 to existential therapy gone wrong, how intense is this thing? Do you have unresolved trauma? Bob asked. Define unresolved. Bob didn't blink. He's ready. Greg took a deep breath and stepped through the archway. Immediately, he was somewhere else. The ground was soft, too soft, and the sky was his old dorm ceiling. Is that a ceiling fan? Greg muttered. No, wait, that's a carnivorous plant mimicking a ceiling fan. Neat. He turned. He was in a simulacrum of his college dorm room, complete with dirty laundry, 3 empty ramen cups, and a motivational poster that read, You're not a total disaster asterisk. In the corner sat a figure, himself. Or rather a version of himself wearing a suit, with better hair and significantly fewer bags under his eyes. Great, Greg said. It's Smug-Me. The clone stood. Hey, Greg, still bumbling your way through life. Still relying on luck and jokes to cover your insecurities. Greg crossed his arms. Still acting like you got kicked out of a motivational TED Talk. You're not a warrior, Smug Greg continued. You're not brave. You're a placeholder. You joke because if you stop joking, you'll have to admit you don't belong here. Greg looked around. I mean, you're not wrong, but I did beat a giant murder spider maze and a 6-armed roid lizard. With style. Accident, Smug Greg said. You stumbled through like always. You lucked your way out of failure, but eventually the luck runs out. Then what? Greg was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor beside a pile of virtual socks. I don't know, he said. Maybe I fail. Maybe I get vaporized or flattened or eaten by a wall, but I'm still here, still showing up. Still raising my hand, even when everyone's laughing. Smug Greg tilted his head. You're not supposed to be brave, Greg continued. Not the kind people expect, but maybe showing up anyway, maybe that's asterisk my asterisk version of brave. Even if I trip over my own feet while doing it. There was silence, then a small ding. Smug Greg began to flicker. Oh, he said, looking mildly impressed. You're not completely hopeless. Thanks me. The clone vanished in a ripple of light. The dorm faded, the room dissolved. Greg found himself standing in front of the Oracle again. The violet archway pulsed once, then powered down. You passed, Bob said, sounding faintly surprised. Most people break into tears by the time we get to the dorm room setting. I cried asterisk during my dorm years, Greg said. This was a nostalgia tour. The Oracle hovered closer. You were honest with yourself. That is rare. Yeah, well, Earth has this thing called imposter syndrome. I just took it on a date and never called back. Bob nodded solemnly and floated away, muttering something about existential sandwiches. Greg turned to Pip, who was now wearing a tiny hat that read Trial Support Drone. That went okay, right? You opened up emotionally, Pip said. I'm filing this under miracles. They ascended back toward the arena, where the crowd was unusually quiet. Greg's return was met with uncertain applause, like a room full of people clapping because they weren't sure if the performance was over. Queen Zelari watched him. This time she wasn't just curious. Her gaze was sharper, narrower, filled with something Greg couldn't place. Evaluation, maybe, or recognition. High above, the announcer orb said, Greg of Earth has faced himself. Results. Minimal psychic scarring. Potential NON0, mental stability under observation. Greg waved. I'll take that as a compliment. Pip adjusted his hat. You're 3 trials in, that's either incredible or a statistical error. Probably both. They headed toward the contestants' quarters again, where danger awaited and snacks were always suspiciously alive. But for now, Greg smiled. He'd faced worse than monsters. He'd faced himself. And lived to joke about it. Greg awoke to the sound of someone whispering his name in 16 different dialects of urgent. Greg, hissed Pip, hovering inches from his face, his optic pulsing like a disco ball in cardiac arrest. Wake up, the council's convening early. Something's wrong. Greg blinked sleep from his eyes. He was still on his floating slab of a bed, surrounded by other contestants, snoring, growling, or meditating forms. One warrior was balancing a spear on his foot while levitating. Another was muttering something about vengeance in a language that sounded like boiling soup. Greg groaned. Is it another trial already? I just finished recovering from the last one. My soul's still sore. This isn't a trial, it's a protocol deviation, Pip said. Emergency session, they're trying to disqualify you. Greg sat up straighter than his spine preferred. Wait, what? I'm 3 trials in. That's like halfway to being charming. They're citing Clause 23J, Pip replied. Something about insufficient ferocity and repeated displays of whimsical behavior. That's just me being relatable. The door to the dorms hissed open. A pair of sentient robes floated in, carrying a scroll and wearing an expression of pure legalese. Greg of Earth, the robes intoned. By order of the Council of Elders and Trial Integrity Subcommittee, you are hereby summoned to the throne chamber for evaluation. I didn't even have breakfast, Greg muttered. Your emotional vulnerability during the trial of truth was deemed suspiciously sincere, the robes added. Since when is honesty a red flag? Pip hovered closer. Since honesty started outperforming plasma cannons. Moments later, Greg stood again in the vast arena, this time beneath the glaring crystalline eyes of the Queen's Council, seated in their hovering judgment cubes, each more geometrically pretentious than the last. The largest cube, Counselor Tharnavex, twitched with disapproval. This human, Tharnavex rumbled, is undermining the dignity of the trials. I'm enhancing the ratings, Greg offered. Have you seen the meme numbers? Another cube blinked disapprovingly. Your behavior defies all known logic of courtship, strategy, and violence. Exactly, Greg grinned. Which makes me unpredictable, that's a tactical advantage. Boom, warrior logic. Silence, growled a third cube, possibly wearing monocles. We will now. I overrule, said Queen Zelari from her throne. The council cubes froze mid-hover. The crowd inhaled sharply in 13 different respiratory styles. Your Majesty, Tharnavex stammered, he has violated. No law, she interrupted. The right allows any who complete a trial to proceed, and he has, repeatedly, unconventionally, yes, but so have past champions. Remember the fungus empress who won via interpretive dance. The cubes shifted uncomfortably. One coughed up spores. Zelari stood. He continues. Greg blinked. I continue, that's a good thing, right? It is temporary, she said. Impress me again, or don't bother returning. He smiled. So just another normal Tuesday then. She didn't smile back, not exactly, but one of her left eyes squinted, almost fondly, maybe. Or maybe she was imagining vaporizing him. With royalty, it was always hard to tell. As Greg and Pip left the chamber, they passed 2 warriors glaring so hard it made the air taste like resentment. She's watching you, Pip murmured. She's always watching me, Greg said. I'm very watchable. Later that evening, a surprise feast was declared in honor of continued trial integrity, which meant mystery food, unidentifiable liquids, and dancing reptiles in gold capes. Greg sat at a side table, nibbling a cube of something that tasted like disappointment and lime. She's testing me, he muttered. Obviously, Pip replied. Also, I scanned this food and it might be sentient. I think it winked. One of the dancers cartwheeled into a pillar. No one reacted. Across the room, Zelari was seated on her elevated platform, not looking at him. Definitely not, probably. Greg sighed and reached for another food cube. It bit him. He pretended not to notice. Maybe I should try harder to fit in, he said. Be more warrior, why more stabby? That would involve stabbing, Pip pointed out. Your reaction to danger is sarcasm and evasive tumbling. It's very effective tumbling. Before Pip could argue, the floor beneath their table rotated 90 degrees. Not dramatically, just enough to imply future disappointment. The announcer orb appeared, chiming with the subtlety of a megaphone in a library. Due to unforeseen council drama and increasingly inconvenient morale spikes, the next trial shall be advanced to tomorrow. Contestants, prepare your wills and helmets. Greg stared at his food cube, which was now dragging itself toward his drink. Pip. Yes, please tell me the next trial is normal. There's a cannon and riddles. Greg groaned. Why can't I have a trial that involves napping or interpretive dance? Pip beeped. To be fair, you do interpret danger as a dance. They returned to their quarters, where warriors sharpened their weapons, meditated under gravity pulses, or chanted ancient motivational proverbs. Greg flopped onto his bed and stared at the ceiling, which glowed with slowly shifting constellations designed to soothe anxiety. He still counted 3 of them glaring. She stood up for me, he said quietly. Yes, Pip replied. She didn't have to. No, Greg rolled onto his side. Does she actually think I could win this? Pip clicked, maybe, or maybe she just doesn't like being bored. Greg snorted, guess we have that in common. The lights dimmed. Somewhere outside, a war drum boomed, followed by a loud crash and someone yelling, I meant to do that. Greg smiled into his pillow. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't even consistent, but he was still in the game. And sometimes that was enough. For now, the arena had been reconfigured again. This time it looked suspiciously like a cosmic board game designed by someone who had heard about chess once, eaten it, then tried to rebuild it using lasers and pure ego. Hovering tiles flickered in and out of existence above a gravity pit that murmured threats in ancient binary. Massive holographic numbers floated overhead, constantly rearranging themselves as if unsure whether to count or just impress. Neon tendrils of light pulsed with a rhythm that was almost definitely mocking Greg's resting heart rate. He stood at the designated starting tile, which was very clearly labeled in 3 languages. Begin here or regret elsewhere. Pip hovered beside him, flashing low-level anxiety colors and rereading the official rules aloud. Trial 6, the strategic mind, Pip recited. Objective. Defeat the hive brain of Zathrak 7 in quantum tactics. Sub-objective, maintain bodily cohesion. Optional bonus, survive with dignity. Greg nodded. Cool, so what's quantum tactics again? Pip buzzed. It's like chess, but the pieces exist in superposition until observed, and the board may rewrite its own laws depending on confidence levels. Right, definitely sounds like a fair test for someone who once lost at Go Fish to a 9-year-old. That 9-year-old was a psychic dolphin, Pip reminded him, with a gambling problem. Across the board, the hive brain materialized. A floating mass of pulsating gray tissue encased in a crystal orb, surrounded by tendrils of thought that sparked with neural lightning. It radiated smugness. Greg gave it a thumbs up. Hi, big fan of your hemispheres. The hive brain responded with a series of mental pulses that translated in Greg's mind as prepare to be intellectual vapor. Greg rolled his shoulders. Well, at least it didn't go straight for your species is inferior. Progress. A synthetic voice announced the start of the game. Tiles lit up beneath Greg's feet. 3 pieces blinked into view in front of him, a triangle, a cube, and what looked like a chicken leg. Are we sure this isn't just breakfast? Greg asked. Pip hummed. You're the player, the pieces will respond to your decisions. Greg pointed at the cube. Okay, you go, forward. The cube vibrated, split into 2 smaller cubes, reformed into a sphere, then teleported 1 tile sideways. Greg blinked. It's like programming with my emotions. The hive brain's move was a blur. 5 pieces shifted, 2 disappeared, 1 became a Möbius strip and insulted Greg's ancestry in a whisper that made his ears itch. Greg rubbed his temples. Okay, fine, let's get weird. He picked up the triangle, threw it like a frisbee and shouted, Pyramid power. The triangle froze midair, rotated 11 times, duplicated, and launched itself across the board. One of the hive brain's pieces exploded into a puff of scented logic. The audience gasped. Somewhere a commentator bot declared, move RANKED, irrationally effective. Greg grinned, that's the Greg brand. Please don't name a strategy after yourself, Pip muttered. The hive brain pulsed harder now, sending out waves of probability distortions that twisted the board. Tiles reconfigured mid-round. Greg's chicken leg piece evolved into a turkey, then into a mechanical ostrich that immediately began pacing nervously. Greg crouched beside it. Listen, buddy, you're my wild card. I believe in you. The ostrich blinked red and deployed a missile launcher from its chest. Good talk. Hive Brain launched another series of moves, attempting to encircle Greg's remaining pieces with logic loops and existential crises. Greg, having experience with both, simply shrugged and moved his turkey ostrich diagonally through time. The move triggered a paradox ripple. The board split into two simultaneous realities, one where Greg won immediately and one where he exploded. He looked at Pip. "Can I vote?" "No, but I'm emotionally invested in the non-explosion outcome." Greg focused. He centered himself. He imagined his old Earth apartment, the smell of burnt toast, the sound of plumbing that didn't want to live, the soft glow of the refrigerator light. Calm, then he moved his last piece forward, straight through both versions of the board. The game paused. Then with an audible thunk, the Hive Brain's core flickered, dimmed, and slumped midair. Greg raised both arms. Did I just beat an intergalactic neural entity with poultry and vibes? The board dissolved in a... Greg was halfway through a dream about arguing with a toaster over tax deductions when the alarms started. Not polite, dignified alarms. The Zethurian version, which involved sentient klaxons singing operatic warnings while setting off minor localized earthquakes. His bed flipped him onto the floor with mechanical urgency, while the wall displayed the helpful message, "Get up or die fashionably." Greg groaned. What now? Did the arena develop feelings again? Pip zipped out from under a maintenance panel. "Emergency banquet, royal security breach, protocol Omega-5 fizz." "That doesn't sound like breakfast." "No, but it is asterisk a catered assassination attempt." Greg blinked. "I'm sorry, did you just say catered?" "They're very traditional," Pip said. "It's rude to assassinate royalty without offering refreshments." A message crackled across the intercom. All remaining contestants to report for mandatory feast in honor of survival. Probability of poison, medium. Greg pulled on his boots, one of which immediately fell apart. He stapled it back together with a tiny repair device Pip handed him. "You think this is part of the next trial?" he asked. "No idea," Pip said, "but statistically someone's getting impaled." "Could be me. Statistically still you." By the time they reached the grand banquet hall, the tension was almost chewable. Tables stretched for miles, covered in every known delicacy across 3 galaxies and 12 questionable food groups. There were gelatinous towers that hummed when poked, skewered fire beasts still smoking, and what appeared to be a quantum salad that existed only when you looked directly at it. Greg selected a plate of something labeled spicy logic squares and took a cautious bite. It argued back. He nodded, impressed. Warriors gathered at their assigned places. Greg, still without rank or threatening appendages, was placed next to a mollusk champion who introduced himself with a wet slap and a grunt that translated roughly to Frank. Frank the mollusk offered Greg a bite of his glowing stew. Greg politely declined. Frank blinked twice and devoured the bowl whole, ceramic included. Trumpets blared. Queen Zelari entered the hall flanked by guards made entirely of shimmering light and polite menace. She did not sit. She simply stood at the head of the room, gaze sweeping across the survivors like a galactic school principal about to ruin someone's semester. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate not the end but the endurance." Cheers. 6 remain. 3 have perished with honor. 1 exploded by accident. Murmurs. Greg raised his hand. "Was that the guy with the hover sandals and the soup cannon?" "Correct," Zelari said without missing a beat. "He will be remembered briefly." The room quieted again. "But," she continued, "even in celebration, we are not immune to disruption. Today, during a routine ceremony, an assassin breached the palace barrier." Everyone looked at Greg. He blinked. "Wasn't me. I've been arguing with spicy math for 20 minutes. Zelari's eyes landed on him anyway. "Greg of Earth." "Yup. You saved me." Greg paused. "I did." "You sneezed into a ceremonial incense sphere." The resulting explosion revealed a cloaked intruder wielding a phase dagger. "Oh, I mean, sure, you're welcome. I sneeze with purpose." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Even Zelari's mouth twitched. "You will be rewarded," she said. "The next trial is delayed. You have earned reprieve." Greg blinked. "Wait, I did a thing. And now I don't have to almost die today." "Correct." He turned to Pip. "This may be the first time sneezing has ever been heroic." Pip adjusted his hover settings. Earth sinuses, the underrated superpower. The feast resumed. Music played, strange, drifting tones made by vibrating jellyfish and unwilling harmonicas. Contestants loosened their armor. Even the food seemed less hostile now, although Greg was certain his dessert was blinking at him. He found himself seated again, this time at a smaller table with Queen Zelari, who had quietly dismissed her guards. Only Pip remained, pretending not to hover directly between them like an overly protective heir friend. Greg cleared his throat. So, how's it going? Reigning over vast empires, that sort of thing. Zelari sipped from a cup that emitted soft, nebulae as steam. Uneventful, until recently. Greg tried his dessert. It dissolved his spoon. Yeah, I've heard I have that effect. I've watched your progress, she said. You are unlike the others. Because I'm unarmed and wear pizza shirts. Because you improvise. He shrugged. Improvising is what you do when you have no idea what you're doing, which is always. She looked at him, yet you continue. Because quitting would make for a really anticlimactic story. Another silence, not uncomfortable, just floating. I wonder, Zelari said, what would you do if you won? Greg paused. Honestly, ask for a vacation, maybe a sandwich. She tilted her head. That is all. I mean, I'd also probably ask you to explain how your politics work, and why your ceremonial bread bites back. Zelari actually smiled then. It was subtle but unmistakable. You ask many questions. Occupational hazard of being confused 90% of the time. She leaned forward slightly. Then let me give you something in return. She reached beneath the table and placed a small object before him, a stone perfectly spherical, warm to the touch and humming with subtle power. Greg blinked. Is this going to explode? No. Is asterisk that what you'd say if it were going to explode? Zelari gave a quiet laugh, rare and real. It is a token, an anchor of protection. Only one remains. The next trial is unpredictable. Greg held the stone gently. Thank you. I'll try not to drop it into soup. See that you don't. They sat for another few minutes. Then, as more drums began to sound and the feast turned toward fire juggling and arm wrestling, Zelari stood. You've bought time, Greg of Earth, she said. Use it wisely. He watched her walk away, guards trailing like patient shadows. Pip floated down. You just had dinner with the Queen. Yeah, Greg said, and didn't die once. This might be your greatest achievement. Greg smiled at the stone in his hand. We'll see. Above, the stars glittered. Somewhere beyond, the next trial was already waiting. But for now, there was laughter, blinking desserts, and just enough quiet to pretend that the galaxy wasn't watching every move he made. The next morning, Greg found himself in a robe made of something called skyfleece, which felt like wearing an apologetic cloud that occasionally purred. He was escorted by 2 crystalline guards who said absolutely nothing the entire walk, unless you counted the occasional data chirps they made to each other that translated to phrases like asterisk, still breathing, and asterisk, high probability of tripping. Greg glanced at Pip, who was trailing just behind, updating himself in mid-flight with a new firmware patch titled Sarcasm Mode V2. So, Greg whispered, where exactly are they taking us? The Hall of Final Trial Preparations, Pip replied, also known as the Room of Unreasonable Expectations. I thought I earned a day off. You did, Pip said, which they spent designing something they're calling the culmination of your existence. So technically, this is your fault. The hallway they entered blinked into new configurations every few meters, shifting colors, adjusting gravity, and occasionally emitting facts about endangered starfish. By the time they arrived at the chamber's entrance, Greg was walking slightly sideways and wondering if his kneecaps had always been this moody. Inside, Queen Zelari stood alone. No council, no guards. Just her and the wide, circular room lined with ceremonial torches that each contained a small simulated sun. Greg stepped in and immediately bowed, though it resembled a startled stretch. Zelari watched him with that unreadable expression of hers, the kind that made Greg feel like a hypothesis being tested. You're early, she said. I woke up because my bed tried to eject me again. I figured the universe was hinting. Zelari gestured toward the center of the chamber. You've come far. Mostly by accident. Still far. Greg scratched the back of his neck. So is this it, the final trial? She took a step closer. No, this is the decision. Greg blinked, like a choose-your-own-adventure thing. More like a question, she said. A truth you must face before the others. She motioned, and a projection burst into life between them, a swirling hologram of the galaxy. Planets, wormholes, entire systems dancing in radiant orbit. Then it zoomed in one tiny, mostly blue marble tucked near the outer rim, Earth. Greg stepped forward instinctively. This is your home, Zelari said, and it is under consideration. Greg turned. Consideration for what? For elevation, she replied. You've drawn attention. Many factions have watched your progress, not just mine. Some now believe your species is worth contacting. Worth integrating? You mean first contact? Yes. Greg's mouth went dry. You're saying, if I pass one more trial, Earth gets invited to the big cosmic neighborhood barbecue. Essentially. And if I do, back to obscurity. Containment, quiet observation. Greg let out a low breath. No pressure then. Zelari moved beside him. That is why this next trial cannot be measured in strength or logic. It is a test of intention. A second projection shimmered into place, 6 doors, each different, one made of smoke, one made of crystal, one humming with gravitational pull, one carved from ancient root code, one shaped like a mirror, and one glowing like Greg's last brain cell during a math test. You may choose only one, she said, and behind it, whatever the universe decides you must face. He looked at Pip. Pip was suspiciously silent. Do you know what's behind them? Greg asked. No, Pip replied. But I'm currently calculating which one looks least likely to result in transformation into sentient mist. Greg circled the doors slowly. He stopped at the mirrored one first. His reflection blinked, then winked. Nope, he said, moving on. The smoke door whispered secrets about taxes. The gravitational one made his eyebrows feel heavy. The root code door had vines that wriggled. The glowing one pulsed gently like a calm heartbeat. He pointed. That one, the heartbeat one. Zelari gave a nod. Enter alone. Greg nodded. He reached into his hoodie pocket and felt the stone she'd given him, still warm. He stepped through. The space beyond wasn't a space at all, it was memory. His memory, but off, like a dream made by a committee that had only skimmed his autobiography. He was back in his childhood kitchen. The floor creaked in the wrong places. The fridge door had 3 handles. His mother sat at the table, but her face was a blur, her words made of static. Then a voice, his own voice, spoke behind him. You're still trying to impress them. Greg turned. His double was back, not smug this time, just tired, worn. You think if you win you'll matter, the double said. I already matter, Greg said, unsure if it was true. You're still the joke, the accident. The guy who trips into glory and calls it strategy. Greg clenched the stone tighter in his hand. I may not be the guy they expected, but I showed up. I kept showing up, that counts. Even if you fail. Greg nodded. Even if I fail. The double stepped back, then prove it. The kitchen vanished. He was surrounded by light, a presence wrapped around him, not a being, not words, but a question. Who are you really? Greg didn't answer with thoughts. He just held out the stone, the one thing he hadn't earned with tricks or stumbles, the thing given to him. The light flared. He was ejected, gently back into the chamber. The doors behind him shimmered, then vanished. Zelari stood waiting. She tilted her head. Well, Greg offered the stone. I kept it safe. She took it, examined it, then returned it to his hand. You didn't need to protect it, she said. You needed it to protect you. He looked down. The stone had changed. It now pulsed with a slow golden rhythm, like breath. You passed, she said. Greg exhaled. What's next? Zelari turned, already walking away. The final trial at dawn. Greg looked at Pip, who had reactivated and was busy pretending he hadn't been nervously monitoring from behind the wall. Well, Pip said. That went better than expected. You're still human and not screaming. Greg looked at the stone again. It wasn't about winning. No, Pip agreed. It was about choosing. They walked out of the chamber into the growing twilight, one more trial ahead. But now Greg wasn't walking for himself. He was walking for a planet that didn't know it was watching. Greg stood once more in the center of the arena. This time, there were no roaring crowds, no thunderous trumpets, no exploding Beatle orchestras. Just silence and a single platform suspended in the sky by unseen forces. He looked down. There was no floor, just the curve of Zethurian below, glittering like someone spilled a box of stars. Pip hovered beside him, wearing what Greg could only assume was his version of formal attire. Slightly shinier casing, and an unnecessarily elegant top hat he downloaded 30 seconds ago. So, Greg said, adjusting the strap of his very worn-out backpack, this is it. The final trial, Pip confirmed. Codename Destiny, Doom, or Decorative Pageantry. Greg squinted. That last one sounds nice. I made it up to lower your blood pressure. Across the platform stood Queen Zelari. Her armor shimmered with a subdued glow, ceremonial rather than combative. She held no weapons. She wasn't surrounded by guards. It was just her, standing tall, every eye on the galaxy watching through 1,000 feeds and psychic live streams. She gestured. Greg approached slowly, resisting the urge to trip dramatically just to break the tension. Zelari's voice was calm. Greg of Earth, you have completed every trial, mostly by surviving through an unpredictable mix of panic and charm. You have defied expectations. I do that a lot, Greg said, usually in elevators. You have amused the Council by existing, which is honestly the most passive-aggressive compliment I've ever received. She took a step forward. Now we reach the final choice. There is no opponent, no obstacle, only this. Will you take the crown and become my consort? Greg blinked. That's it, no maze, no ancient riddle whispered by a time crab. This is the riddle, Zelari said. You are not required, you were never expected, but you earned this place. Not through strength, but through something far rarer. Greg stared at her, at the stars, at the platform floating above nothing. He thought of Earth, of his tiny apartment, the late-night cereal dinners, the telescope with the cracked lens, the moment he hit the wrong button and fell through a wormhole like someone tripping into fate's recycling bin. He thought of the trials, the labyrinth, the duel, the games, the reflections, the soup, of Pip, of the stone in his pocket, of her. And slowly, Greg reached into his hoodie, pulled out the anchor stone, and held it between them. I didn't come here to win, he said. I didn't even come here on purpose. But somehow I ended up in this crazy tournament, full of claws and logic puzzles and meat that screams. And every time I kept thinking someone would say, all right, joke S over, send the human home. But no one did. He stepped closer, and somewhere along the way I realized I wasn't trying to prove I was worthy of a crown. I was trying to prove I was worthy of being *seen. Zelari watched him, unblinking. I can't promise I'll rule wisely. I don't even know if I'll ever understand how your calendar works. But if you're asking me to stay, not because I won, but because of who I've become. He took a breath, then yeah, I say yes. Pip beeped softly, about time. The stone pulsed in his hand and floated upward. It split into 7 pieces of light, orbiting around Greg's head before slowly sinking into his skin like warm rain. The arena lit up. Across the galaxy, signals flared, councils paused, observers blinked. Memes were generated in real time. Greg stood beside Zelari. She raised one hand, and the platform beneath them bloomed into a starburst of energy, wrapping around them like a seal. By right and reason, she said, voice echoing, let the universe acknowledge the choice. Let the stars bear witness. Greg turned to Pip. Did she just say I'm officially consort now? You're officially royalty, Pip replied. Which means you'll need to stop storing gum in your socks. No promises. The ceremony ended with a traditional Tharnai finale, a silence so complete it looped around and created its own music. Then, fireworks. Not the exploding kind, but shimmering illusions made from starlight, spelling out messages in languages that hadn't been invented yet. Back in the royal chambers, newly expanded to accommodate one human, one drone, and one suspiciously emotional succulent, Greg found himself holding an official tablet titled *Guide to Being a Galactic Consort, Vol. 1. Don't panic. He tossed it onto a chair shaped like a question mark and turned to Zelari. So, what now? He asked. Now, she said, we rest for 3 days. Seriously, the council thinks it's a meditation ritual. In truth, I just don't want to hear them talk for a while. Greg flopped onto a sofa made of antimatter cushioning. It adjusted around him like an affectionate jellyfish. I could get used to this. You already have. Pip floated over with a beverage. You have 37 formal duties starting next week, 2 interstellar weddings to attend, and a diplomatic dance lesson scheduled with a race of time-traveling worms. Greg groaned. Can't we just fake my disappearance? We already did that, twice. Zelari walked to the balcony, her silhouette framed by the stars. Greg joined her, sipping something that tasted like carbonated peace. You know, he said.